Welcome, everybody. This is Spirituality Adventures. Thanks for joining in. We are starting a new topic, and we are on health and spirituality. So we'll be visiting different kinds of health, physical health, mental health, spiritual health, those kinds of things, and thinking about spirituality through that lens. And today we are excited to have Dr. Michele Kilo with us. And we met over a year ago through a common friend, and I've been so thankful to get to know her, and she's been very much aware of my journey, my meltdown, and everything that I've gone through. But I've also been able to get to know her and her journey and the work that she's been doing with children for decades now. And so thank you, Michele, for joining us today.
My pleasure.
I would love to have you share just a little bit with our audience about your background, your education, and kind of your career path up to point. Like, give us just a brief summary of your past and help people get to know you a little bit.
Okay, my brief summary.
Yeah, not the 1 hour version. But,
right. Well, I grew up in St. Louis, South St. Louis County. In a large Lebanese Arabic family. Both of my parents were American born, but my four grandparents were immigrants from Lebanon and Syria. And a very loud, energetic, food-filled family, which was wonderful. I was a hardworking student.
I've got to interject. I've been to both Lebanon and Syria.
Yes.
And I do love the food. Anyway, I'll let you keep going.
The food is fabulous. And my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, was the second oldest of 8 children and the only girl. And so she was a master
Wow.
Middle Eastern cook. And so all of her recipes have been handed down, not to me, since I don't cook, but to my husband and to my mom and my brothers. And so we all have that legacy. Yes,
Awesome.
We'll have to cook for you sometime,
Right.
Fred.
Yeah.
Or Blake will. I was probably high average brain kid, and just worked really, really hard. I knew in high school that I wanted to do something in the healthcare field and thought I wanted to be a physician, and applied for the 6-year medical program at UMKC. My senior year of high school. Very unsure if I would be accepted because some of the smartest guys in my high school class, the geeks in my high school class also applied. But I did get accepted, and they didn't.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
So I must have had something that they didn't. Maybe a little personality or loudness. So I started in 1978, the 6-year medical program at UMKC, where you start right out of high school, and it's 6 years year-round. Absolutely loved it. It was the perfect match for me as far as college experience and medical school combined, because you started right away in clinical experience, and that relationship building with patients was what I loved. It's really what fed me. Interestingly, as a high school student, when I had been accepted to the School of Medicine and knew that I would be attending there, my high school teachers were all like, "Oh, Michele, what are you going to do? Are you going to be a pediatrician?" And I just rebelled against that. I thought, no, I'm not going to be a pediatrician. I mean, just because I'm a female, do you think that I have to be a pediatrician because women love children? I'm going to be a surgeon. I'm going to be a plastic surgeon. And I went in thinking that that's what I was going to do. Realized as we continued through not only studies, but clinical rotations, that I loved the rotations when I was with kids. It was just incredibly hopeful. And so many people, I think, will say, gosh, how can you stand that? How can you stand working with sick kids? Doesn't it get you down? Doesn't it make you depressed? But the kids don't let you get depressed, regardless of what they have, of what disease they have. They are the ones that bring hope and laughter.
Wow.
And
gives me chills.
Yeah, it was an amazing experience to learn from them. As I was entering my final year of medical school, 1983, going into 1984, and getting ready to apply for residencies and doing all the travel. I've shared this story with you before. In July the 3rd of 1983, my youngest brother, who was 16 at the time, was killed in a boating accident. And devastating for our family. Mm-hmm. He was the youngest of the four of us, and I wasn't sure I was going to be able to finish that last year. We were just absolutely devastated. My father had been standing there on the dock of our family lake house on 4th of July weekend and actually watched my brother Rich be hit by the propeller of a boat and die in front of him. And that was life-altering, obviously, for me and for all of us. But as I was making this decision about what I was going to do, that further solidified for me that I needed to be that connection between sick children or children with a condition and families, that I so understood the pieces of that journey, that it was the right thing for me. And I wanted to use it as a positive experience. Not to say that final year from July of 1983 through June of 1984, when I graduated, was an easy year. Probably first time in my life ever that I could say I knew what depression was. But powered through it, was worried about my parents and my family as well, but got through it, had been accepted for residency at Children's Mercy. And I had a little detour before starting my residency. At the time that Richie was killed, I had been applying for a MAP Reader's Digest fellowship. And ended up being accepted for that and went to Africa for 4 months. Left, believe it or not,
we're at in Africa.
Zambia, Central Africa. I left 1 year to the day of Rich's death, so July the 3rd of 1984. I had graduated in June of 1984. Left for Zambia, Africa, for 4 months, working with a group of Irish Catholic nuns and Jesuit priests who were also all healthcare professionals, running several missions in Zambia. And that as well was a turning point. It was just such an incredibly healing experience.
Interesting.
The perfect bridge, really, from finishing medical school, graduating from med school, and starting residency, where you are still learning and training, of course, in a specialty area, but much more on your own, than you were during medical school.
Was there something about the spiritual component of that experience in Africa that shaped you?
Oh, yes. I grew up Catholic, and loved the Catholic religion as a kid. It was very much a part of our family life, our family traditions. didn't love everything about the Catholic Church or the history of the Catholic Church. You know, some might say that these days they call it a cafeteria Catholic, I think, where you pick and choose the pieces that you really love. But I don't care. To me, that was my religion, my choice, my faith. And, I have to say that it was probably the first major faith crisis after Rich's death, when I thought, okay, how's this possible? How do you get through this? How do you ask parents to endure this? And I really struggled with that the whole year. Stopped going to mass and was doing all kinds of reading, when bad things happen to good people, and, all of that, trying to figure it out, and so much healing took place during those 4 months in Africa. I mean, I was there alone, a 22-year-old girl in Africa for 4 months with no one that I knew, nuns and Jesuit priests from all over Ireland, from England, medical students there training, and Zambian nurses and physicians and patients. And it was absolutely the perfect experience for me in healing that spiritual part of me.
Right. Beautiful.
Yes. So, and I have stayed in very close touch with most of the people that I lived with when I was
that's wonderful.
When I was in Africa. In fact, have been to Ireland twice to live with the girls that I lived with there, who are now, of course, all married and with children themselves. Have stayed very close in touch with several of the nuns that I worked with, who are also amazing nurses and physicians who taught me so much. So it was absolutely the experience that brought me back to life, seeing the need that was there and the love and devotion that these nuns put into running this hospital on a thread. I mean, and the beautiful smiles in these children's faces, the lives that they lived with nothing. I mean, the joy that you saw from using a papaya, to play soccer with out on the fields, the simplicity of their lives. And there was one little guy in particular that was in for months in the hospital in Zambia for tuberculosis treatment that I checked on every day and got to be close with. And he loved my Adidas tennis shoes and shorts. And I couldn't wear shorts out in the open. I had to put a chitange, the wrap around, because the women are not supposed to show their thighs. And so when I was leaving there, I gave him my Adidas shorts and tennis shoes. As he said, my Adidas. And so I think about him often. And he was out in the bush, but he lived in the bush, but was living at the hospital for the completion of his treatment. Wow. So anyway, this is the hour version of my journey. So tell me when you want to move on.
Well, I just find it interesting. Obviously thinking of Jesus's healing ministry, you're in the healing arts, and you're over there having your own emotional, spiritual healing.
Oh, absolutely. At the same
time, you're ministering healing through your profession and the love of people, and that whole love God, love your neighbor dynamic is so powerful. I think
it was very powerful, Fred, and I mean, really has shaped me. I mean, I look back on life and I think, okay, these things happened at such an incredible time, and the timing of them between, not vowing that I wasn't going to be a pediatrician and then falling in love with pediatrics and being in the presence of children and watching you talk about spiritual. I mean, the relationship between children and their parents that you saw, there's nothing that the parents would not do for their children, regardless of whether it was a illness or a developmental disability or whatever. I mean, all of those things were profound experiences, still are for me.
That's awesome.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing that. So give people a little idea of what you've been doing the last, 30 years, I guess, in terms of working with children, the kind of children you've been working with and focused on. So
I completed my 3-year general pediatrics residency at Children's Mercy and when I returned from Africa. And during that time, and when you're doing general pediatrics, you do rotations in every pediatric subspecialty. And that was when I fell in love with the field, relatively new field at that time, of pediatric neurodevelopmental disabilities. And I think it was because as I was traveling through residency and getting the experience of the ICU and acute care and, what really fit me. And I was learning all the way, but I just knew for me, I had to be involved in something that would provide long-term relationships. That's what floated my boat. Okay. That's what I loved. Really getting to know people. The importance of seeing kids in the emergency room. You can't, of course. Everybody wants to have a fabulous ER doctor there who is, quality physician when your kid is the one that's in the emergency. But for me, I needed that long-term relationship. So I fell in love with this new field at the time of neurodevelopmental disabilities. And the person who was my mentor at the time had just come. She was the first physician at Children's Mercy that had been hired to do that field. And she and I wrote curriculum for me to do a 3-year fellowship in pediatric neurodevelopmental disabilities. So I started that in January of 1988, and it was a 3-year program. And during that time, of course, learned the gamut of developmental behavioral disorders that happen in children, from chromosomal anomalies, intellectual disabilities, what we then called mental retardation for various reasons, cerebral palsy, which is more a motor disability, learning disabilities, ADHD, which are the more subtle but still very impactful disabilities, autism, which wasn't as known then in the 80s as, of course, it is now. And all of those really embedded in my training and my clinical experience as well. In 1991, as I was finishing my fellowship, that the mentor that I had been working with during my fellowship left Children's Mercy, and I was asked to take over as the division chief. Right out of my fellowship. I was a little anxious about that because I was still so new and young to the field, but felt like it was an honor to be asked by the chief of pediatrics, who was very dear to me, like a dad to me. So I did. I took that on and served in that role from April of 1991 until the spring of 2018. During that time was both, so that was 27 years, was both a clinician, continued to see patients from very young children, babies, looking at developmental disabilities. What was their diagnosis? At what level were they functioning? What could we do? What were the interventions that we needed to put into place to help them and their parents maximize their potential? During that 27-year period of time, I grew the division tremendously. This is during the time when many of these developmental disabilities in children were first were finally being recognized, as well as autism just growing and expanding in its prevalence across the world. So we grew tremendously with people trained like me, developmental pediatricians, where I was the first ever trained at Children's Mercy. We grew to 10 in the division by the time I left. Child and adolescent psychiatry were colleagues that we were very closely trained with, although they focused more on the mental health disorders, but there's such overlap in these conditions, and psychologists. And so we had 7 child and adolescent psychiatrists and 50 plus psychologists addressing the needs of all of these populations.
Yeah.
It was a huge division.
Yeah.
And
so I'm curious, because you've mentioned at-risk kids as well, which, if I understood you right, and I'm maybe just give this in layman terms, because that's the only way I understand it, but is there a difference between, at some point, did you start working with even another subset of that developmentally challenged group, which you'd call at-risk kids? Or help me out with the language and the terminology around that. So
yes, in some ways, because I was at Children's Mercy, all of these kids in many ways were at risk, depending on the origin of their families, the financial situation of their families. We would diagnose kids with severe autism who were in a single mom family where, we had no idea that if mom had the resources or the wherewithal to be able to get the children the significant help that they needed. And so that's one kind of at risk.
Okay. So there's maybe there's a very limited amount of resources that particular parent might have to work with. The challenges their kid is facing.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So that's a type of at-risk.
That's a type of at-risk, of course. And those are kids that we wanted to follow because we wanted to be sure that mom was accessing the resources that she needed, whether it was her doing it or oftentimes the grandparents stepping in to do it or the school system that they were in.
Okay.
But again, challenges in all of those areas. I mean, sometimes there were grandparents who were raising or watching other of their grandchildren or school districts that didn't have the resources themselves. In probably the late 2010, so maybe 2008, 9, 10, right in there, Children's Mercy formed a relationship with Operation Breakthrough, the child care and school that is on Troost, like 32nd and Troost, right in that area. And that's a different type of at-risk population. And so
what is it? Describe it.
Their at risk is growing up in, being born in, oftentimes being born drug exposed, being raised in single mom homes with no father there, mothers who continue to use substances throughout their day to survive, mothers who are prostituting to survive and put food on their kids' tables, mothers who do not have work, and not having the structure around them. And what happens with all those situations is that those women continue to get pregnant. And so the work of Operation Breakthrough, a beautiful place supporting those families, was to do everything they could to turn those family situations around. And so this is where trauma comes in. So, there's all of this new research over the past 10 or so years on trauma in everybody's life,
right.
And the ACEs scores, the adverse childhood effects, and how it affects children's learning and growth and thriving and health in adulthood as well.
Explain, because I interviewed a few weeks ago a Dr. George Haymack and Dr. Kathleen Keenan, which you're friends with as well.
Yes.
And we spent a little bit of time talking about trauma with Kathleen. And I asked her to describe the difference between big T trauma, and some psychologists talk about small T trauma. But the score that you're referring to is a trauma score.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
Just give us a couple of minutes from your perspective on that.
So the ACEs score was created by two physicians who were working together to look at how do you quantify the trauma that any individual has experienced in their life. And it goes through a series of questions. You can look it up. You just pull up ACEs, and it will give you the survey to look at where you fall in that. And it asks questions about parental mental health, exposure early on to a parent with substance abuse, or any adult in your life with substance abuse, domestic violence, yelling, screaming, kinds of things in your home. And so it looks at, it's based on stress, and they use the term toxic stress. And so, we all have stress, and in some ways stress can be a positive. I mean, it helps you to grow resilience, and but when the stress is a constant in your life, when you aren't ever sure as a developing child, when your brain is supposed to be learning and growing and, learning to read and playing outside and all the positive things. Instead, you're worried about who's going to come into your home next. And are you going to be sexually abused? Are you going to be hit? Are you going to have food on the table? All of those day-to-day life events. And so, I think, I'm not sure what Kathleen was talking about with the little T versus the big T.
Right.
But,
well, even so think about like an idealized healthy support system for a kid.
Right.
You might give us like some key points there, and I'm assuming that type of child would score well on this scale of healthy versus traumatic, but then if you think about the warning signs, and you've just named a couple of them that would give a person a really danger signal that this kid is in severe danger, they've experienced a lot of trauma. What's the healthiest view look like, and what's in the scale of this thing? Then what does it look like to be on the worst side of that scale? And then all of us are probably in between the absolute ideal and the worst, right? I mean, the two extremes.
Sure, because this is life, right?
Yeah,
and life is complex.
Even healthy kids growing up in healthy families. Like with my addiction therapy that I've been doing, I've discovered I've had some small T trauma.
Sure.
Which I would have never actually even classified as trauma. I would have never thought of it that way. I just thought it's just a kid growing up in a normal life. I got bullied. Yeah, everybody did.
Yes,
things
absolutely.
like that.
Right. And I mean, no one's life is perfect.
Right.
How would we even define perfect,
Right. But there's some healthy factors that go into
sure
a well-rounded kid.
Yes. I think, studies have shown that resilience is built in children by having one adult in their life that is a constant, loving, caring adult. Just one.
Just one. Isn't that amazing to think of?
It is. And
shows you how powerful one is.
The power of one.
Yeah.
I mean, and obviously that has to be a consistent presence in that child's life. Someone they know they can count on, that is there for them, that shows them love, that helps them see the best in themselves, that isn't knocking them down emotionally and telling them, what a shit they are. And, I mean, knocking them down both emotionally and physically. I mean, So that, I think, is the start of resilience. And, for all of us, we can look back and see those times where, we were left out of a friend group, or, those are the little t traumas that emotionally kind of got to you at the time. There are some people that believe that trauma begins in utero, that even in utero, the neurologic, the neurochemical milieu of the mother's body and the stress, the cortisol that is kind of, circulating through the mother's body and through the placenta can start an at-risk baby.
Some type of stress cycle that's going on chemically.
Exactly. And, we see that. I mean, right now, so, I've shared with you, after my 34 years at Children's Mercy and 27 years of leading the division and growing many, many programs that I am very proud of, including this collaboration with Operation Breakthrough, where we had psychologists that were trauma experts and really working with those populations of kids to support them and to support the teachers that were there, as well as our Missouri Autism Center that we developed. When I left Children's Mercy, I have now partnered with Foster Adopt Connect, a nonprofit in Kansas and Missouri. And the specific work of Foster Adopt Connect is to support children and families in the foster system and to connect foster children with adoptive lifelong families. They're forever families is what they call them.
Okay.
And boy, you talk about immersion in the effects of trauma. And I mean, even that prenatal exposure. Now, remember, it's so complicated because there is genetics and the biology that we're all born with, and, predisposed to all of the diseases that come in our family line, as well as who it is that keep hitting the microphone. Who it is that the connection is between father and mother, and so those two sets of genetics come together. And in many of these families, it's two families with significant history of substance abuse and mental illness. And even in those children, when babies are born and immediately taken into foster care because of the history.
Yes.
And immediately adopted, the issues, the behavioral issues, the mental health issues that develop in those children, it is amazing. I mean, you look at these families, these parents, the amazing parents that I am now working with.
Great nurture.
Fabulous nurture.
But the nature component is...
The nature is so strong.
Right.
You can't get rid of it. And so, that's where it's so important to have ongoing supports for these kids and families. You can't just say, phew, okay, well, we got them out of that environment. They're home free. No, they're not home free. I mean, it's a constant road ahead.
Lifelong process.
Lifelong process. Yes.
So so a lot of people that are listening right now, there'll be a lot of moms out there that are listening, that are raising their kids during COVID right now. And I'm kind of like zooming out a little bit here, but I'm just thinking about some of the mothers that are listening. Every mother probably worries about how healthy their kid is emotionally, relationally. Now going through COVID, there's a lot of, gosh, how's this going to affect my kid and all that kind of stuff. I'm curious with your experience, having worked with this huge range of kids and developmentally challenged kids, at-risk kids. What would you want to say to mothers out there that are concerned about their own kids, the resources that are available during this COVID time, the stresses that are there? How can they How can they provide the best resources possible for their own environment?
As hard as it is, because parents are also feeling stressed and overwhelmed with the situation and everything that everyone is dealing with right now, the number one thing is for kids to have that positive environment at home, to feel the security of their parents' love and presence, or the adult in their lives' love and presence. Simple statements. We're going to be okay. Everything is fine. Mom and dad are dealing with this, or, grandma's dealing with this. It's our job as parents to take care of you and to make sure that you grow up to be a healthy adult. Your job is not to worry. Your job is to continue learning, to play, and, to grow up to be the kid, the adult that we know you can be. We love you. We are here for you. And of course, it sounds so simple, and it's not simple. You have parents struggling that are working from home, that are trying to get their jobs done, and they've become the teacher. Right. Especially in these at-risk situations. Very different for people who can afford to be working from home and have a nanny who's, doing, or hire somebody to be there to help their younger kids, or for people who have older high school kids or college kids who are, doing that on their own. But for these families, especially with these at-risk situations, to have all of that going on, the stress is enormous. What about people who have lost their jobs? And they're so concerned about where food is going to come from. Will they be able to get a job again once COVID is over? All of those stressors. But if those caregivers can just take the time, take that deep breath, and really think about, what is my message to the children that I am responsible for, the children that I'm caring for. It's going to be okay. We're all going to be okay. We're going to get through this. We're doing everything we can to protect you. And this is our job as adults. This is your job as children.
Excellent. Well, and I know we have single moms that are listening, tuning in right now, and they're hearing this, and obviously they're I'm sure they're going, gosh, I have limited resources. I'm a single mom. I don't have, there's these doubts, I think, that mothers carry in their hearts about how they're doing with their own kids, and there can even be shame attached
Absolutely.
to a mom's thoughts about how well she's doing. This, Brene Brown talks about this shame thing for women is never good enough. It's really for all of us never good enough. But for a mother, that can be really deep. Like I'm just a single mom, and I have these limited resources, and I'm trying to do my best. But they can carry a lot of shame about that.
Yes.
How do you speak to one of those moms and encourage them?
Well, in my clinical practice, what I always do is point out, look at your beautiful kids. Look at how well you have them dressed. They are so, clean, and their clothes are adorable, and look how polite they are. Really pointing out the good work that they have done. These are really, really smart kids. I mean, one of the things we know is that it is amazing how intelligence seems to be preserved, even when there is emotional and behavioral disturbance. Intelligence is often
Isn't
preserved.
that interesting?
It's just fascinating.
Some brilliant kids, right?
Brilliant kids.
Yeah.
And I say to them all the time, look at how smart your kids are. I mean, what potential they have. You are doing a great job. You're doing the very best you can do. Be proud of that.
Yes.
And I say that not just to single moms with little resources,
Right.
but, I can tell you myself as a long-term working mom who often worked 12, 14-hour days for years, day upon day upon day, coming home and thinking, holy cow, I'm doing more for other people's kids than I'm doing for my own. But those little things that you do, it's those comments of, it's not quantity, it really is quality. And I was very lucky that I had a husband who was home more and was a fabulous dad to give all that reinforcement. But I think that for all of us, we question and we have that shame and that negative loop that goes in our head. And I just do my best to turn that around and say, look at the positive that you're doing.
Yeah.
Look at what you're giving to these kids. This is the best start that they could ask for.
Excellent. Yeah, that's so good. We all work better from affirmation, don't we, than from the negative.
Yes.
So I'm curious. So maybe some people are listening and they really are feeling at their limits right now, overtaxed. They feel like maybe they're going to, I don't know, I can hold this together. I'm hearing what you're saying, but maybe some people are on that side of the resource scale where they need some outside help to get through this COVID time. And it could be a long-term thing for them that they haven't even thought about or tapped into, that I'm going to need long-term resource help. What kind of help is out there in our community? I'm assuming there's resources that people probably don't even know about sometimes. At the same time, I'm guessing a lot of those resources during this time are tapped out.
Oh, they're so tapped out, Fred. I mean, even under normal times, in this country, social services are tapped out because of the significant increase in mental behavioral health disorders across our country in children and adults. And that's a whole other topic that, we don't even have time for today.
Right.
But this has, COVID and this pandemic and the isolation that comes with it has just added to that. And so, but I would say there are community mental health centers that anyone can reach out to, and they are geographic. There is, in Independence, in Johnson County, in the Northland, there are community mental health centers that are there to help. There are crisis lines that are there in a situation where, if a parent is feeling completely overwhelmed and needs that help. The other thing that
is that a phone number that they can?
It is, and I don't know it off the top of my head.
Say the name one more time.
Well, there are community mental health centers, and I think anybody who has access to a phone or the internet,
just Google it.
Google community mental health centers, and they will all pop up, and it tells you where what the catchment area is. But we can't emphasize too much the personal connections during this time. Despite that we can't be close together physically, that we're not supposed to be hugging, still calling on the phone, or, talking to a neighbor from porch to porch, or Zooming, if you have access to that, with other moms. That connection is so important. Reaching out to your kids' teachers. They know the resources. They would be able to help. I was just on a call yesterday with several mothers and community resource providers in the Kansas City, Missouri school district, as we were looking at the resources available for kids with IEPs and developmental disabilities throughout this COVID experience. And
what's the IEP?
Individualized educational plan.
Okay.
The IEP that any child that has a clinical diagnosis of developmental delay is eligible for a specific plan to meet their needs in the school system. And the one things that the moms on this call said had been life-saving to them through this period of time was their relationship with other moms and with their kids' teachers. Reaching out to those teachers to say, hey, this is what we're experiencing. This is what we need help with. And if the teachers couldn't get it, many schools now have social workers and have counselors' offices. And, so there are any number of ways to get that help. I think it's just reaching out and asking for it and utilizing the positive relationships in people's lives.
And this may be where social media can help a little bit in terms of networking people without physical presence.
Absolutely. Yes.
That can be a positive if you have a smartphone or something. Download some of these things, and your school probably has a Facebook page or a whatever.
And there are all kinds of resources right now for people that are experiencing these exact things. Are you overwhelmed? Are you anxious? Are you feeling depressed? Call this number. And the other thing that we would be remiss if we didn't mention is churches. Reaching out to churches and pastors and, letting people know, I'm not doing well. I mean, I'm feeling, overwhelmed. I'm in a crisis right now. And asking for help from those spiritual leaders.
Yes.
I think this is a time where people who are in service to others, whether it is healthcare professionals, whether it is, church leaders, social service, welfare people, are open to doing everything they can to help.
Right.
Yep. We have to do that. We have
team and community approach.
Yes, absolutely.
100%.
Absolutely. Yes.
All hands on deck.
Yep. Yep.
Hands
and hearts on deck.
Right. So, I mean, that I wanted to take a bit of time to ask, so there's some people out there that might feel, everybody feels stressed probably to some degree, but some are thinking, I have some free time I could give. I could volunteer. I could help in some of these situations with at-risk kids or something like that. What are some ways that people, if they were interested, could volunteer? How can they help be a part of that community support system through volunteering? What are some of your favorites that you would like to see people, and how can they get connected and that kind of thing?
I am on multiple boards of children's advocacy groups right now, or not-for-profits in the community that support and serve children with developmental disabilities, or various organizations like that. The hard part right now is that we can't be together in person.
Right.
And so volunteering has really taken on a different shape through COVID. And so, I wish that people were able to go and come together at Harvesters or a food pantry and feel like they were really giving back, doing food drives, doing clothing drives, those kinds of things. You still can. I think anybody can, start. And one of the things I've heard, you probably have too, through all of COVID, is people have said, my gosh, I've never had so much time in my own house. I've cleaned out all the food that we haven't used. I've cleaned out my closet. My closet is, finally, organized. And so I think there are lots of organizations where you can go and drop off, food items, clothing items. There's a Turning Point up here in the Northland, just off of I-29 in Wacomas, that is a food and clothing pantry for, the underserved and refugees in the Northland.
Yes.
There is the organization that I'm now partnering with, Foster Adopt Connect, who has a clothing pantry, and they have a big food truck that unfortunately was just stolen. You might have seen that on the news. The truck was from the warehouse, but they have a food pantry where they drive to deliver food, and they've got a campaign right now called Give Joy for the holidays, where you can go online and adopt a foster child or a family of foster children, get the details of that those children, buy gifts for them, and deliver them to Foster Adopt, and they will then be delivered to those families. I think that there's always Harvesters, and I'm not sure what Harvesters is doing right now with people wearing masks and staying socially distanced.
Yeah, their volunteers are doing that. But I mean, since COVID started, the increase in the distribution centers for Harvesters are churches as well as other communities. And so, but they're going at it big time.
Yes.
So there are ways to volunteer through that. This Foster, what's the name of the group?
Foster Adopt Connect.
And was this the one you were telling me about that has a program coming up here in the near future through the holidays, or just? It's
the Give Joy campaign.
Okay.
Through Foster Adopt Connect, and they're the ones who have, and the executive director Lori Ross has, in sending an email out to all of their donors and the people that they're connected with, has said, this is one of our biggest years of need ever.
Okay.
And so there's a link on the Foster Adopt Connect website for the Give Joy campaign, where children in the foster system can be adopted and, given gifts and clothing, et cetera, for the holidays. Yes. Right. And that campaign is in full swing.
I'm curious, one of the groups that you're on the board with is the Center for Conflict Resolution.
Correct.
And from what I gathered, that was an interesting approach to restorative justice in our urban core schools.
Yes.
Trying to pinpoint really big conflict things that can boil up and turn into, unfortunately, can turn into even murder situations, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
But to intervene into these situations, and I'm thinking conflict, I'm thinking with COVID, the increase in addiction statistics and domestic violence and all these things, that organization's got to be going on full speed as well.
They are, and they continue to work in the schools, doing a tremendous number of virtual trainings to get teachers on board with conflict resolution, with restorative justice practices, and learning those restorative methods of resolving conflict, coming together, kind of circle processing, neighborhood accountability boards, where if there are disputes between neighbors, and more of that is happening because people are irritable and they're at home all the time. So the staff at Center for Conflict Resolution is just going, gangbusters with the work that they're doing to really help the community look at this situation that we're all in, this pandemic, as an opportunity to come together in a non-conflict, non-violent way.
Yes. Excellent. Well, this has been fascinating. I so admire your work with children, and it's inspiring for me to hear all the work that you have done, the kinds of things that you advocate for, and the way that you have served our community so beautifully over the last several decades. So I really appreciate you doing that, and I thank you for sitting down and just sharing with us some of your work and what you're doing. Maybe you could give us some closing thoughts, speak to our audience out there in this time of COVID, and particularly with an emphasis on children. Just give them some words of hope. Like, I think you've done that very well already, but maybe just to give some closing thoughts here for our audience.
This is just such an incredibly challenging time for our entire world. And one of the things that I have tried to do is to use mindfulness in a more consistent way. And so, the practice of really focusing on this present moment and what can I do in this moment, taking that deep breath. And I have worked with several of my patients and families, have sent them links to guided meditations for children as well.
Oh, cool.
And
can you name one of those real quickly?
Well, there's
curious.
all kinds of you just have
for children.
For children.
Yeah.
Yes, there are links for mindful
just
meditation.
Google mindful meditation for children. You'll find it. Okay.
Yes. Yes, there's Mindful Moment, there's Insight Timer.
Okay.
There's several apps that have mindfulness meditations.
Right.
But there's also lots of things that are really geared specifically to introducing mindfulness to children, and programs across this country that are focusing on inner city schools and using the practice of mindfulness, which, the research is showing that meditation and mindfulness and bringing yourself into that present moment and pushing out the negative and really focusing on the emotional well-being,
right,
really changes brain chemistry.
I'm fascinated with this. First of all, I was just experiencing it for myself, but then I would love to find somebody here in Kansas City that I could interview for this segment on spirituality and health that's really good at mindful meditation. Do you have any recommendations?
I do indeed.
We'll say it publicly, and no, I don't want to put pressure on her or him or her. But
yeah, I do indeed. I'll share some of those names
Very
with
good.
you.
Thank you.
Yes, yeah, but I think in any way possible is through the stress and anxiety is taking that step back and trying to refocus on the positive. Mm-hmm. What do we have? What are our blessings? And this is the perfect time, right? Thanksgiving is next week, and one of my favorite holidays of the year, because it only involves being grateful and food. Of course, that's wonderful too.
Exactly.
But, no gifts. It's not about gift buying. It's not about the craziness of commercialism and consumption and being out there. It's about being grateful for what we have. And so this is a really good time to say to parents, take that step back and really talk with your kids about not what we don't have, but what do we have?
That's excellent. Yeah, I was reading, this brain that we have, like negative things stick to it like Velcro. I heard somebody say, but then positive seems to slip off like Teflon.
Yes.
Like the old Teflon analogy. And so you actually have to take time, at least 20 seconds, just to focus on something great that you're grateful about and positive about, for it actually to sink in and affect your whole well-being.
Right, absolutely.
So that's a practice.
And over again.
Exactly.
Fred, not just, I'll try this one time.
Right.
It's like anything.
Daily.
It's like exercise. Mm-hmm. It's like the biking that you and I do. Mm-hmm. It'd be great to say you're going to go out and, do a couple miles one time and you're set for life, I mean, anything that we do that is good for us has to be a practice. Kind of focusing on the future, not the immediate gain, but the future. That's what I've said to my own family about Thanksgiving. We're not getting together in St. Louis as a big family, as we so often have. My little 5-some or 6-some is staying here in Kansas City, and we have to do that right now because it's what's good for today, but also good for the future, for the health of all of us. So really, I think focusing in that way is important for all of us. As hard as it is, we got to do that self-talk.
It is.
to get us into that mindset.
Excellent. Very important. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And
very welcome.
Thanks
Thank
to
you.
everybody who's tuned in, and we appreciate it. Continue to follow us here at Spirituality Adventures, and we'll see you next time.
Harvey Media Production.